Welcome back, Chess College, Humanities 4 Film Studies. How was your weekend? I didn't post one of these on Monday because technically it was President's Day. So that's why I'm posting my first one today, Wednesday, middle of the week. It was a nice day here today. The weather was actually lovely. Tomorrow's going to get cloudy and rainy again. I've got all your papers graded. I've had some responses. People have some issues with some of my comments. That's cool. Keep at it. I'm going to sign another essay on Friday, not tonight. By now, everybody should have this book, Writing About Movies. It's going to help you write these essays to perfection. What are you looking for? Asking why. Meaning, why is the characters doing what they're doing? Why is the camera where it is? Why is this film considered a groundbreaking film? How to describe a plot. The importance of taking notes. When you're watching these films, take notes when you're watching them and start looking for these things that are in this book, looking at movies. There's a great chapter. How to actually look at a movie critically. Now, also, this is writing stuff, and you should always know this anyway because you're going to be writing for other classes. You should know you're writing for an audience. Yes, right now your audience is me, but other people, maybe you read it to your friends, maybe they see it, I don't know. So always keep in mind that you're not writing a personal journal entry that only for your eyes only. You're writing it for an audience, me. And you want to explain everything to the audience in clear and concise terms. That's really important. And obviously keep out the slang and the street language. We don't need that in college. Consider your tone and style. Are you being humorous? That's fine. I like humor in my writing. Some of my comments, I think, are humorous. Maybe I'm wrong. Like I try to put a little levity in these lectures. How to synthesize material. Here's a whole segment on synthesizing material from the film Citizen Kane. Meaning you look at the plot, not just describe it now, how to critically analyze what's going on, what you're seeing, and put it into coherent sentences that make sense, that you're explaining it to the reader. Now, the thing is here's another thing I've read some great papers, by the way. There's no right or wrong in this. You could be completely wrong about something, but you've only seen the film one time. I don't expect you guys to be experts on all these silent films, these old films about something, but you've only seen the film one time. I don't expect you guys to be experts on all these silent films, these old films. Absolutely not. In fact, that's not the point of the class. The point of the class is you don't know these films and you are learning. This is the literature of films. You're not reading things, you're watching things. Yeah, you can read stuff, you can research, do that, that's fine. But so how to look at the material and synthesize it down. So when I talk about when I'm asking a lot of people, I say, well, break it down. What's the theme? What's going on here? What do you think is going on here? And themes usually, or it could be several themes, many themes in one movie. They're usually not the broader themes, meaning it's usually not, the theme of the movie is love. Well, that's pretty general. What about love? Love is a complicated topic. Shakespeare wrote about it 500 years ago. We still don't understand it. It could be revenge, hate, whatever. It's usually, there's more themes to that than just those generalized terms. You got to go deeper and really look at the film like a piece of literature, like you are reading Shakespeare or Moby Dick, The Great Gatsby. Maybe you've heard of those. Because this is this is film. This is those versions in cinema, movies. It's all not just about entertainment or trying to kill time or a ride like you're at the Santa Cruz roller coaster. It's much more, much more than that. It has been much more than that, and it continues to this, right now. And so when you're writing these essays, really go after it with the critical eye and start breaking it down. When I say break it down, meaning what is the director up to? What do you think he's up to? Uh, is he doing a good job? She doing a good job? Right now, it's mostly all male because women aren't directing movies yet, films, but they've all faded from history mostly. Um, to this day, it's hard for a woman to get recognized as a director, although there's more working now than ever before, especially in HBO and TV. So where do they fit in? Where do African American directors fit in? Yes, they're making films in the 30s for a predominantly African American audience. We'll be talking about that when I cover Black filmmakers later. So those things are out there, but they're not on the popular Hollywood radar, as you might say. So what I'm trying to get you guys away from is writing the plot of the story. I know the plot. I've seen the movie. I appreciate you're doing that. That means you've seen the film, I think. That's not what the point of the paper is. It's not to just reiterate the plot. It's to break it down. Look at the direction. Look at how the scenes are staged. Is it effective? Is it not effective? Is it what are the performers doing? Are they effective? The camera, very important. What's the camera doing? Music, themes. And this book has all of those, and it tells you how to break these things down, whether you understand totally what photography does or understand acting that much. It helps you put your critical thinking hat and think about it a little deeper than just saying, I really like it, or it's really cool, or it's good. Don't write that. Explain it. Explain everything. Another thing to remember, and I'll keep going to reiterate this, it's not a review. You're not reviewing it from your 2021 life, current cinema, and comparing it to the cinema now to then. You're not saying, I really like this movie. I enjoyed it. That's great that you do. Or if you don't like it, that's fine too. But that's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for you to critically analyze what's going on in that movie. Somebody wrote it. Somebody cast it. Somebody directed. Somebody made those costumes. Somebody photographed it. A lot goes into making these films, and I want you guys to start to see how the whole mechanism works into creating this story. Please get that book. If you haven't got the other book, I know a bunch of you haven't yet. I won't assign anything yet, but I will keep assigning from the DVD on Canopy. Hope you're seeing that stuff. I'll probably assign some more this week, but so that's where we are on all that technical stuff. Your other paper's due tonight, I think by midnight, and then I gave you an extra 3 days or so, I think till Friday, 2 days at midnight. You'll be marked down late. You'll lose 2 points for being late right off the bat. And if it's not in by Friday at midnight, you'll get 0 points, unless you got some really great excuse. And run it by me. I'll believe you. I don't need a doctor's notice. If you're not feeling well, fine, tell me. If you're in a car crash and you're in the hospital, please tell me. If you've had a baby or got married, you got to just tell me why you're late or you get a 0. I'm pretty easy to work with. I don't need excuses because we all have our lives. We all have things that pop up, deaths in the family, and illnesses, and accidents, and good things too, not just bad things. Um, anyway, I'm not going to sign it tonight though. I'm going to assign it on Friday, so it'll be due next week. So don't worry about it this week. That'll be essay 3. Um, today I want to talk about um, we've gone through the Depression, Prohibition, silent films, the first talkies that you just wrote your essays about, your next one, and now the next bunch of films follows the decade from say 1940 to 1950 or thereabouts, the World War II years. And this is when Hollywood goes to war. I'm going to be posting some stuff for you to look at, little documentaries on Hollywood going to war. And I hope I'm going to sign something, but if you don't have Netflix, you won't be able to watch it because I think it's only on Netflix. It's called Five Came Back. I'm going to talk about that exclusively in a moment. It's a documentary about World War II. If you have it, please watch an episode. I think it's 3 episodes long, an hour apiece. Great documentary, uh, produced by Steve Spielberg, Tom Hanks. So it's new, with new directors talking about these 5 directors that actually joined the military during World War II to serve their country. So now we've come down to the Depression. We're back at work. Things are starting to look up. And then Pearl Harbor happens. And that changes everything, throws us into a world war with uh, Japan and Germany and Italy, of all places. Italy is a fascist country, and they are allies of Hitler. And now we've got to go to war. So, what does Hollywood do? Well, they keep making movies, and they make World War II movies, or also referred to as propaganda films. And propaganda is not a bad word. Um, it could be abused. It could be corrupted. Soviet Union was making Soviet propaganda films when, to look how great it was, life behind the Iron Curtain. People make propaganda films to make their position in the world known. Is it true or factual? Well, it's a fictional account of what how they want the world to perceive them. We are no different. We needed to get the war machine up and running fast. We were not prepared for this. We were not prepared for Pearl Harbor. Maybe you know about it. We were taken off guard, and almost our entire Navy fleet was destroyed. We weren't prepared to go up against Hitler either when we were called into that conflict. So what did we had to do? We had to crank up the war effort quick, and boy did we. But we couldn't just do it with taxpayers' money because there wasn't enough. So what they did was sold war bonds. Anybody could buy them. That was the point. And how do you sell war bonds? You sell them everywhere. And you can buy a war bond for $25, and that $25 goes to the war effort only. And when I say the war effort, I'm talking about not just weapons and bullets and bombs and airplanes and army tanks, but also uniforms, food, and the whole bit that puts a nation army with maybe 2 million people in the army. That's a big army, folks. And they've got to be fed and clothed and trained. And that's where all that money goes. So it was hugely important. And people were willing to give because the American people believed in uh, going up against Hitler and Japan simply because, for one, Hitler had already invaded a bunch of Europe, and they were our friends, and it was bombing London. London had nightly air raids, 1939, 1940, before we were in the war. Hitler was sending bombs over and bombing the civilian populace. That never happened before. That was not fair game. And so when they were doing that, and then the Japan bombs essentially a navy that was in dock in Pearl Harbor, everybody was in bed, and they took the war on a surprise sneak attack. That supposedly wasn't fair either. But in order to conduct a war, you kind of got to put these things aside like fairness. And you got to go after it hard and heavy. And we learned a lesson from World War II. We got caught sleeping and we paid the price. But we were going to turn the payback and the justifiable payback around on these evil countries, and we were going to need to do it fast. And so we needed lots of money, and we needed everybody to go to work. And we needed the men to join the army or be there. We had a draft. And so the army going up, and men were going off to be trained to go to war. So what that meant was, who's going to do the jobs here in America? Who's going to build the ships, the battleships, and the tanks, and the bullets, and the uniforms? Well, folks, it was women. Rosie the Riveter, maybe you've heard of that term, maybe you've seen posters, went to work. She became a welder, a builder, strong, independent, and for the first time in the history of the world, especially this country, women were no longer just housewives taking care of the kids at home. They were a completely important strategic part of the war effort to get the stuff, ways and means of war, up and running, while the men were going to go fight it in Europe and in the South Pacific. And so the war effort was huge. Hollywood responds by making propaganda films, World War II films. A lot of times they starred John Wayne or Van Johnson and others who didn't go to fight in the war. They had their reasons for not joining, or they're 4F, or they had families already. They don't have to go if you have a family. And their movies were simply there to show that we needed help. And at the end of the movie, there'd be an announcement in the movie theaters where these movies, this is long before television and Netflix, you had to go to the movie theater to see this, and people would come out with bonds. You'd go into a movie and you would pay your 50 cents for the ticket, and you'd buy a $20 war bond right at the ticket booth. So these movies were there to help sell war bonds. And if it's a World War II movie, and it's pro-American, it's pro-democracy, it looks exciting and good. It's they're telling a well thought out story. And there's some really, really good World War II movies. There are. You wanted to give. It helped loosen your purse strings. Hollywood went to war in a big way. They had war bond drives where the movie stars would go out and they'd give stump speeches in New York and Chicago and LA, Hollywood, everywhere. And people all love seeing a celebrity just like we do now. And these celebrities would go out there and raise a lot of money for the war effort because they were asking for money. The whole country got behind this war. And it wasn't like the wars we're doing now. This was considered the good war, the good fight. We're going to go fight Hitler and Japan. And nobody had any problem with it. Yes, there was people who were against the war. There were conscious objectors. There were. But nothing like the division of the war effort. Now, we're in 2 or 3 different wars going on all the time in Afghanistan. I don't think we even pay attention anymore. We've been in there 10 years. We're all still going to Starbucks here, so I guess everything's okay. That's not how it was then. We had shortages here, like gasoline. You couldn't drive your car often. You had to get to there's rationing on certain products like gas and rubber. You mean for your tires? For products, food products like sugar and milk, there was a shortage, and so you were giving coupons, and you could only get so much. And everybody was fine with that. Everybody sacrificed because we needed to sacrifice for the war effort. So these movies came out, and Hollywood is still thriving. They know how to get your money, even during the war. And we needed it. The government needed Hollywood to get the war bonds sold. And Hollywood came calling in a big way. Now, I want you guys to watch this documentary. It's called Five. I'll announce it. I'll put it up there in an announcement. It's called Five Came Back. It was made in 2017. I think I just mentioned. Steve Spielberg and Tom Hanks produced it. And it's on Netflix. That's all I know. It's on Netflix. You can find it somewhere else. I'm not sure where it is besides Netflix. You can stream it. And it tells the story of 5 Hollywood directors who quit their Hollywood jobs of directing movies, joined the military, and went to war. Now, thing is these are guys who weren't fighting the war. They're too old for that. Most of them were in their, I think John Huston was the youngest. He might have been in his late 30s, but everybody else was in 50s. I think John Ford was into his 60s already. So they're not going to be holding a rifle and going to fight that way. And so what they did was they fought the war with their cameras. They were going to document the war. And they started a whole film division in Washington, D.C. And John Ford and a few other people were ahead of it. That John Ford, who was the director who had directed many, many, many silent films. He directed The Informer, huge John Wayne movie, The Stagecoach. Maybe I've talked about that. Hagerino's My Valley, The Quiet Man. He was at the top of his game in 1942. Just had done The Grapes of Wrath, wonderful job, the John Steinbeck novel. And he put it all down and to join the military. And that meant he left his family in Hollywood. Yes, they had nice mansions. Then they're all pretty well off money-wise, but the paycheck stops. There is no more Hollywood money coming in. And the amount of money made in the military was not that much. I think they made him a captain or a colonel. He was getting $100 a month or something. And room and board wasn't enough to feed a family, but his family sacrificed because he needed to go do this. The other directors were John Huston, who hadn't directed much yet because he was just starting. He had written a couple screenplays. His dad was the famous actor Walter Huston, and John was just getting started in his career, and this could have killed his career dead. He had done Maltese Falcon with Humphrey Bogart. That's about it. And then he went off and he joined the military to make documentaries. The The other one would be the other couple are Frank Capra was probably the most famous one at the time. Frank Capra, who had directed one of the movies you I don't know who I assigned which movie to which class, but um, one of you guys, several of you guys, are writing the paper on It Happened One Night. That's a Frank Capra movie. He had directed Mr. Deeds Goes to Washington. Um, he was considered a very populist director, kind of like Steve Spielberg of his day, meaning he goes to Washington. Um, he was considered a very populist director, kind of like Steve Spielberg of his day, meaning he directed films that are very popular with people. Steve Spielberg is like the most popular, I think, director in history of our films, and he's made $1 billion, more so than George Lucas, by the way, who directed Star Wars. Spielberg knows how to capture that wonder, awe of the American middle country in most of his films. Look at E.T. Need I say more? Okay. Capra, I think might have been one of the head of the division when he went back to Washington D.C. The other director would be somebody you never heard of, probably George Stevens, who up until now had directed. He directed some. He's mostly known as light comedies and screwball comedies and musicals. And now, when he got back, things changed. When he got back, his movies took a dark turn. And but he was at the height of his career, successful, and he went also. George Stevens. The last director is William Weiler, who's one of my favorites. I love John Huston also, and John Ford, by the way. They made some great films. Not all their films are great, but most of them are. William Weiler wasn't even born in this country. He escaped Nazism when it was coming into his country. I think he's Austrian, German, possibly. And he fled the Nazis and came here and became a very, very successful director. His films would be his great World War II film with Greer Garson and Walter Pidgeon. Mrs. Miniver raised millions of dollars. It's a wonderful film about a family in London getting bombed every night and how they persevere and live with the horror that they have to go through every night. The interesting thing about these guys, think about it right now. What director, what actor would give up their career to go fight right now in, say, Afghanistan? I'm not sure where we're at. I think the war is kind of winding down in Iraq, but we still have troops. We're still trying to get them out of Afghanistan. We don't have much there, but say 5 years ago when it was pretty heated up in Afghanistan, can you think of any actors or directors, screenwriters? Did anybody leave their Hollywood mansions to go join the army and fight? No. When 9/11 hit, there was a football player, and he just signed a contract to a professional football team, I think for $2 or $3 million for the first year. And he believed in fighting terrorism so fervently that he walked away from that $3 million contract. He did basic training, was in the U.S. Marines, and he was killed in action. Why am I forgetting his name right now? This is horrible. Why didn't I write his name down? You know who it is. I know you sports fans know. Just gotta look it up real quick. Anyway, Why I'm looking it up, because I want to get that right. Pro football. Anyway, how many would sacrifice everything right now? This is ridiculous. Just hang on a sec while I do this ridiculous thing here. Yeah, yeah. Pat Tillman, killed in action. Um, that's who it is, folks. He was born in '76 and died in 2004. Um, he joined the army after the 9/11, and when he was killed over there, they wanted to use his death as propaganda. This is the United States government now. This is George Bush, not senior but junior, and so they made this fake story up that he died a hero's death. Turned out not to be true. He was killed by his own guys accidentally. They call it friendly fire. When the bullets are flying, folks, and you have different people in different positions, and you're in front of somebody from behind you is shooting over your head. That's not a good situation. He was shot from behind by his own guys. So they hid it. They even hid it from the parents. The parents got this letter saying your son died a hero's death. Now, see, what the government wanted to use was they wanted to ramp up the war effort, and they wanted the approval of the war. And so they used his death. They said it was a hero's death. Yes, he gave his life for his country, absolutely. But he wasn't fighting off the enemy. He was killed by his friendly fire, like I said. Parents didn't know about it. They even had a big ceremony in Washington, D.C. And there's a great documentary called The Pat Tillman Story, where they cover all this. And when his parents found out the truth, they sent the medal back. They sent the letters back to Bush and said, "How dare you use our son to prop up this war?" Which is what they were doing. And so it did not turn out good for the Bush administration. And Pat Tillman's parents have to live with that they tried to use his death for their purposes. So propaganda is still going on, folks. World War II, there's a ton of it going on. These directors go out there and they're filming their films. And just to give you don't think it was safe. It was not. For example, John Ford got 2 Purple Hearts. He is responsible for shooting the documentary footage on the Battle of Midway in the Pacific, which was on our Navy against the Japanese Navy and airplanes. And you should see the footage these people got. It's incredible. And he was hit by shrapnel from a kamikaze that hit the plane, that hit his boat and blew up. He was hit with shrapnel, and he was very proud of that. And he used that a lot in his. He was definitely arch conservative, and he used that a lot against what he thought were people who were not as patriotic as he was, because he sacrificed. And people like John Wayne didn't. And John Ford used John Wayne in John Wayne's best movies, from Stagecoach to The Quiet Man to The Searchers, Fort Apache and Rio Grande. And but he always kind of made fun of John Wayne behind his back, because John Wayne did not go because he already had a family. And so he opted not to go. I need to stay home and take care of my family. And they said, fine. Ford felt that was unpatriotic. Now, the thing is if you look at it that way, John Wayne did not go fight in the war, but he fought in a lot of World War II movies, and he raised millions of dollars in propaganda money on the war effort. So in a way, he really did his duty. He did his job the best way he thought he could do, not shooting a gun at somebody, but being a hero in all his movies. And he is a hero in all the World War II movies. And it brought in a lot of money. So he did his patriotic duty that way. That's just a couple of these guys that are in this movie. Now, when they came back from the war, things had changed. Some of them didn't think they were going to have a career anymore. Literally thought they'd never get to work again, that career was over. Hollywood now was cranking out of the movies with other directors that didn't go fight somewhere or join the army. And so these guys came back, and all of them directed possibly their finest films after they got back. Now, they changed. The war changed them. They were no longer naive about the savagery of warfare. If you guys ever seen Saving Private Ryan, you know what I'm talking about. Don't just think it was the Germans or the Japanese who were doing dirty stuff. Americans did it too, because in war, everything's dirty. And Saving Private Ryan, if you remember it, when they finally got up out of the beach, Germans were trying to. They had their hands up with white flags, and the guys were executing them. That's supposedly something we didn't do, but we did do it, folks. That's something they do, and that's the propaganda, always showing the badness that the enemy does, not what we do, because we're supposed to be above all that. So John Ford the war's over. He's still in the military. He doesn't know what he's going to do next. They want him to come home and direct a movie because they need his director, his brilliance. And so he wanted to do this film called They Were Expendable. Came out about 1946, right after the war. And Hollywood didn't like it. The producers go, whoa, 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 this doesn't look like a heroic film. This doesn't look like good propaganda. And John Ford said, well, I'm not coming back then. I'm not directing anything because this is the reality. This movie is how it really is, not the fantasy of Americans are all doing the great job. They're doing great things. They're winning everything. So he was given complete control over that movie. Now that movie is John Wayne is in it. He's not the star. Robert Montgomery is, and it's about PT boat commanders. And John Ford filmed those guys for reals when they first came out in the early part of the war. Before we had our big battleships built, they built these things called PT boats. They're patrol boats. Are small and they're fast. John F. Kennedy, our president, he was a captain on one. And if you ever saw McHale's Navy, you know what I'm talking about. That one, that's PT boat. And so he made this movie about these people who were doing PT boats and they're fighting destroyers and huge battleships on these little boats, but they're fast and furious and they could dodge. And, you know, a lot of them got killed, tons of them. And it was very, very dangerous. The boats were really fast. They're made out of plywood, and they had a couple large machine guns and maybe one cannon. So it was for just hit and run type of action. Had like a crew of 12 on them. And so Ford goes, that's the movie I want to make. And it doesn't end. It does end. I love this movie. It does end on a positive note, like there's going to be hope. But in the movie, we lose. We got our hats, as they call it, being polite here, handed to us by the Japanese early part of the war. We weren't ready to go up against the war machine that they'd already building up. We still were building ours up. And so in this movie, they all get destroyed. And they're going home with our tails tucked in between our legs. And it was when the famous quote that MacArthur, who was the admiral, the general of that whole area of the Navy at the time, where he left his islands, and his famous quote is, "We will return." Yeah, we did return about a year later, and then we took the war back to Japan, and Japan paid the price. But we weren't there yet. And so the studios wanted a happy ending. It is a positive ending, meaning the quote, "We'll be back," and then we know what the history is. We did come back. But he left it hanging. Guys were killed. It looks like we lost. And we did early on in the war. He wanted to portray that as truthfully as possible. George Stevens came back and did the Diary of Anne Frank, which is, hopefully you know that story. Anne Frank, the Jewish girl that was hiding in the attic with her family in Holland from the Nazis who were going around finding all the Jews and putting them in concentration camps. It's a heartbreaking movie based on her diaries. It's realistic and well done and heartbreaking, and we all know the end. The Nazis find her. Her whole family gets put away. She dies in the concentration camp, but she left behind, she was, I don't know if she was 20 yet. Anyway, her famous diaries were made into that movie. William Weiler, who had done this great propaganda film called Mrs. Miniver, came back and he did probably the greatest anti-war coming home movie ever made, called The Best Years of Our Lives, about 3 returning veterans coming back to their hometown after they'd gone off to the war for 4 years. And it's not a pretty picture. They all struggle. Now you would call it post-traumatic stress syndrome. They didn't have that term in those days. They were called shell-shocked, or just like, get over it, get back to work, like everything's hunky-dory. It was not. And it's a wonderful film with Frederick March, Dana Andrews, and won all sorts of Academy Awards. And it's brutal because it's so realistic. It's how the vets weren't treated that well when they came home. They didn't get their jobs back. They lost their girlfriends to other people who didn't go to the war. The list goes on. Who else is out there? John Huston came back and directed the Treasure Sierra Madre, which is not a World War II film, folks, but it's a film about greed and redemption. It's a masterwork, and he did that right after the war with Humphrey Bogart. Walter Huston, his dad, is in it. Who am I leaving out, folks? I think I covered everybody. Ford, Huston, Capra. Capra did a film that was so controversial at the time, it was a big bomb. It's called oh, I'm going to draw a blank on it. Why didn't I write that down? You all know it. You watch it every Christmas. James Stewart comes home. He has suicidal thoughts. He wants to kill himself. You know the movie. Come on. It's a Wonderful Life, 1946, and it was considered a downer. The guy wants to kill himself because he feels he hasn't done anything in his life. He has been ineffectual. All his dreams, nothing has come true. And James Stewart starred in it with Donna Reed, and now they play it every Christmas. It's a huge, Christmas movie because it's set during Christmas in the movie. And so he wants to kill himself. And then an angel comes down who's kind of a comic relief. He's kind of it's his first real job as an angel. And he shows him his life in the town if he hadn't been alive in the town. And there's this huge loss. He did mean something. His life did mean something. And when this movie was made, James Stewart, he went to war. Actors went to war too. Clark Gable joined up, hundreds of them. James, and they were in combat, folks. They just weren't racing war bonds like a celebrity. Clark Gable was a gunner. He flew many missions, and he was a huge star. He had done Gone with the Wind, for Christ's sakes. Did he need to go? He did. One of the reasons why Clark Gable went is his wife. He is married to his wife. He is married to the wonderful character, and she was killed during the war. She was raising war bonds, and her plane, Carol Lombard was her name, and her plane flew into really tough desert, rocky terrain down in Southern California. And she was killed. And he was so heartbroken over it, he didn't want to do any more movies. He wanted to go get some payback. He joined the military. But I got sidetracked there. I was talking about, who was I talking about? Sorry. Capra makes this movie, and it was a bomb. People go, nobody wants to see anybody want to kill themselves. And so James Stewart actually thought his career was over. He said, well, this movie failed, and I'm never going to get to work again. Well, it took a little while before it was reevaluated as a masterful work of filmmaking. And now it's hard to believe it was a failure when it came out. The box office, public, it was too much of a downer, I guess. Anyway, so these guys came back from the war stronger than ever. They wanted to tell the truth. They couldn't just do lightweight entertainment anymore, stuff to kill time in the movie. They had something to say because they had seen the darker side of ourselves. And you can't hide from that if you're an artist. So, propaganda films. I'm going to talk about some more of it. I'm going to do another lecture on Friday. I didn't do one on Monday because it was a holiday. So I'll do it on Friday, and I'll sign the next paper on Friday. Try to look at this documentary. I'm going to try to get you guys to do a discussion on these propaganda films. Five came back if you see it. If you don't see it, I'll post the trailers for it, and you can read about it. Anyway, I hope you guys are hanging in there. Please get this little book. It will help you not just in this class, in all your classes. And it tells you the terms. It tells you the terms, cinematic terms. Remind me on Friday. I'm going to talk about that more. But that book has the terms: auteur, mise en scene, what the cinematographer does, what a director does, all that. What's the director of photography do? Cinematographer. It goes through that whole thing. What does an editor do? I think you might know because we all have kind of insights to this kind of stuff now. If you put out YouTube videos, you edit them, But this was, it's all part of the filmmaking process that makes cinema that important. Okay? All right. And on that note, keep up the good work. I look forward to your next essays. Have patience. I'm a little slow on the grading. And remember, everything's cinema.